The restraint chair was supposed to be terrifying. 8 feet tall, made from some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light, with neural dampeners that could supposedly shut down the higher brain functions of any sentient species in the known galaxy. The prisoner sitting in it looked like she was reviewing a restaurant menu. Commander Yelath circled her slowly, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking against the floor with each deliberate step. He'd perfected this routine over 3 decades of service to the hegemony. The measured pace, the pregnant silences, the way his 4 arms moved independently, creating an unsettling visual that had broken stronger minds than whatever this human possessed. She glanced up from the small notepad she'd somehow produced despite the restraints. "Are you going to keep doing that clicking thing, or should I order something while we wait?" Yelath stopped mid-stride. In 30 years, no prisoner had ever interrupted his opening psychological assessment. Most species were already trembling by now. The Caraxians usually started weeping. The Zenthari began reciting prayer poems to their ancestors. This human was taking notes? "You seem to misunderstand your situation," he said, letting his voice drop to the subsonic frequencies that triggered instinctive fear responses in most carbon-based life forms. "I am Yelath, 3rd caste interrogator of the Hegemony Intelligence Division, Enforcement Branch, specialized in psychological breakdown and information extraction." She looked up again, pen poised. "Yes, I read your file. Graduated top 12% of your class, which is impressive considering the competition. Your success rate with non-compliant subjects is 86.4%. Not bad, but not great either." The chittering sound Yele made was involuntary. No prisoner should know his graduation ranking. That information was classified at levels that required genetic verification just to access. "Tell me," she continued, flipping to a fresh page, "do you always start with the scary walking thing, or do you mix it up sometimes? Because, I've got to say, the build-up is solid, but the execution feels a bit routine." This wasn't going according to protocol. Yelath had broken enemy commanders, resistance leaders, and terrorist masterminds. He'd reduced a Vorthak war chief to a sobbing confession in under 20 minutes. But this human was critiquing his technique like she was grading a performance. He slammed one of his primary hands against the arm of her chair, bringing his face close enough that she could smell the metallic tang of his breathing apparatus. "You will tell me everything. Your mission parameters, your chain of command, the location of your hidden bases. And you will do it now." She blinked once, slowly. "Okay, but first, why do you still sleep with that little carved figurine your clutch sister made for you before she molted?" The world went very quiet. Yelath's secondary arms stopped their rhythmic movement. His breathing apparatus clicked twice, which meant his autonomic systems were cycling through emergency protocols. No one knew about Tith's gift. He'd hidden it in his private quarters on a dozen different stations across 3 sectors. It wasn't in any official record, any personal file, any communication log. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Is it?" The human consulted her notes again. "Let's see, small, carved from the heartwood of a kestri. About 4 inches tall, depicts a warrior in traditional 3rd caste ceremonial armor, but the proportions are wrong because Tis was only in her 2nd instar when she made it." She looked up with genuine curiosity. "Do you really still whisper to it when you think no one's listening?" Yelath's training kicked in. This was advanced psychological warfare. Somehow she'd gained access to classified personal files, surveillance records, maybe even planted monitoring devices in his quarters. It was sophisticated, but not impossible. "Impressive intelligence gathering," he said, forcing his voice back to professional neutrality. "But these games won't work on me." "Games?" She seemed genuinely puzzled. "Oh, you think I'm trying to unsettle you? That's adorable." She flipped through her notepad. "Yelath, I'm not playing games. I'm just checking my facts. Like how you haven't spoken to your broodfather in 6 cycles because he disapproved of your career choice. Or how you requested a transfer after the Meridian Station incident because watching those prisoners die in containment reminded you too much of what happened to your first clutchmate." The interrogation room was soundproof, but Yelath could swear he heard his own heart hammering. Korath's death wasn't in any file. It had happened during their juvenile trials, before either of them had entered military service. The only beings who knew the details were dead, classified, or how you still blame yourself for not being faster, she continued softly. Even though the predator swarm hit without warning, and there was nothing a juvenile could have done against a pack of Morthecs. Stop! The word came out strangled. She set down her pen and looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. You carry a lot of guilt for someone who spent his career making other people confess theirs. Yeleth stared at her. This human knew things that existed only in his memory. Private thoughts he'd never shared. Moments from his childhood that predated the hegemony's surveillance state by decades. How? He managed. How what? How do you know these things? She picked up her pen again, made another note. Which part? Any of it? All of it? His voice was climbing toward panic frequencies. That information doesn't exist. There are no records, no surveillance logs, no possible way. She was reading something in her notepad now, brow furrowed in concentration. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to check. About that name your mother used to call you. The one from before your adult naming ceremony. Yeleth went completely still. She mused to whisper it when she thought you were sleeping, didn't she? When you were just a hatchling, before the hegemony decided who you were supposed to become. No one knows that name. His voice was barely a whisper. The human looked up and smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, or a triumphant one. If anything, it seemed almost fond. Hello, Ticker. The sound hit him like a physical blow. That name. His real name, the one his birth mother had given him in the dark hours of his first molting, existed nowhere in the universe except in his oldest memories. His mother had died in a plague outbreak when he was barely past larval stage. The name had died with her, except this human had just spoken it aloud. Yeleth staggered backward, his exoskeleton clicking erratically against the floor. That's impossible. You can't. There's no way. Ticker, she said again, gently. Your mother loved you very much. She was proud of the warrior you became, even if she worried about the things you'd have to do. Something inside Yeleth's chest cavity was making a sound he hadn't heard since childhood. A keening noise that his species made when their world stopped making sense. Who are you? He whispered. The human closed her notepad with a soft snap and looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her species' short lifespan should have allowed. Hurried her attention. This is the question. She stood up from the restraint chair as if the neural dampeners were suggestions rather than commands. The metal cuffs that should have been molecularly bonded to her wrists simply weren't there anymore. But I'm afraid the answer isn't going to make your day any better. Yeleth reached for his emergency beacon, but his hand wouldn't obey the command. He tried to call for backup, but his vocal cords had apparently decided to take a vacation. All he could do was stare as this impossible human walked to the center of the interrogation room and waited. You wanted to know about my mission parameters, she said conversationally. Well, here's the thing about that. The lights in the room flickered once. I'm not actually a prisoner. Yeleth's training screamed at him to activate lockdown protocols, to flood the room with paralytic gas, to do something, anything, that would restore his advantage. But his body remained frozen, caught between disbelief and a growing terror that felt like ice crystals forming in his circulatory system. My name is Cassidy, the human continued, as if she were introducing herself at a social gathering, instead of revealing herself as some kind of impossible entity. Cassidy Thorne. I realize that probably doesn't mean anything to you yet, but it will. She walked to the observation window, reinforced transparasteel that should have been unbreakable, and placed her palm against it. Where her skin touched the surface, hairline cracks began to spread outward like a spiderweb. You see, Ticker, your people have a fundamental misunderstanding about what happened to Earth 23 years ago. The name hit him again, and this time Yeleth couldn't suppress the keening sound that escaped his breathing apparatus. No records, no surveillance, no possible intelligence operation could have uncovered something that existed only in the final moments before his mother's death. The official report, Cassidy continued, not seeming to notice his distress, states that Earth was successfully sterilized, population eliminated, biosphere rendered uninhabitable, clean sweep, another backward species removed from the path of galactic progress. She turned back to face him, and Yelith realized with mounting horror that her eyes weren't reflecting the room's artificial lighting the way they should. They seemed to absorb light instead, like looking into deep space. "The thing is," she said, "your people are really, really bad at checking their work." The transparasteel window chose that moment to collapse entirely, falling to the floor in perfectly geometric fragments that made no sound when they hit. "Do you want to know what actually happened on Earth, Ticker?" Yelith tried to speak, tried to move, tried to think of anything beyond the impossible fact that this human knew his secret name and was apparently immune to every containment system the hegemony had ever devised. "The orbital bombardment worked exactly as planned," Cassidy said, settling back into the restraint chair as if it were a comfortable armchair. 96% of the surface was reduced to radioactive ash. The atmospheric processors did their job. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out every piece of technology more complex than a mechanical clock. She paused, tilting her head slightly. "But here's the funny thing about humans, Ticker. We're stubborn, and we're really, really good at hiding." The door to the interrogation room, 3 inches of battle-tested alloy designed to contain anything short of a small nuclear device, simply wasn't there anymore. Yelith couldn't remember seeing it open or hearing it close. It had just ceased to exist. "The hegemony killed 4 billion humans that day," Cassidy continued, her voice taking on a tone that reminded Yelith uncomfortably of his mother's storytelling voice from childhood. "But they missed 3 billion, give or take a few million." Something was moving in the corridor beyond the missing door. Shadows that didn't match the lighting, sounds that weren't quite footsteps. Turns out, when you're facing extinction, you get creative about survival. Deep bunkers, underground cities, generation ships hidden in asteroid fields, sleeper colonies on worlds so remote they don't appear on any star charts. Yelith finally found his voice. "That's impossible. Our sensors would have detected—" "Your sensors," Cassidy interrupted gently, "detect what we want them to detect." The shadows in the corridor resolved into shapes that hurt to look at directly. Tall figures in form-fitting suits that seemed to bend light around them, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. 23 years, Ticker. Do you know what humans can accomplish in 23 years when they're properly motivated? More figures appeared, moving with a fluid grace that came from perfect coordination. They took positions around the interrogation room without making a sound, like ghosts made manifest. "We learned your languages, studied your technology, mapped your territory, identified your weaknesses." Cassidy's smile was warm and terrible. "We became very, very good at being invisible." Yelith's emergency beacon was screaming in his head, but no signal was getting through. The room's communication systems were dead. The facility's AI wasn't responding. For all practical purposes, he and this impossible human were alone in a pocket of space where the normal rules had stopped applying. "And now," Cassidy said, standing up one final time, "we'd like to have a conversation with your government." The figures in the corridor stepped into the light, and Yelith got his first clear look at what humanity had become in their years of supposed extinction. They looked like death wearing a human face. Yelith's claws scraped against his portable data terminal as he desperately searched for any trace of Cassidy Thorne in the hegemony's vast information networks. His secondary hands trembled as he cross-referenced biometric databases, prisoner manifests, intelligence reports, and even historical archives dating back to the Earth's sterilization. Nothing. According to every system in the Empire, Cassidy Thorne had never existed. No birth records, no genetic profiles, no travel logs. The ship she'd allegedly arrived on, a standard human transport vessel that should have been catalogued and destroyed decades ago, appeared in no registry, matched no design specifications, and according to the docking bay's own sensors, wasn't actually there. "This is Administrator Vex requesting immediate database verification," he transmitted to the facility's central AI. "Cross-request for subject identity, with all available records." The response came back in less than a nanosecond. "No matching records found, no historical data available. Subject parameters do not correspond to any known entities." Yelith stared at the terminal's blank result screen. The hegemony's information network was absolute. Every being who had ever lived under imperial authority existed somewhere in its quantum storage matrices. Entire civilizations were cataloged down to individual DNA sequences. The system didn't make mistakes. It certainly didn't fail to record the existence of someone sitting 3 feet away from him. "Having trouble with your homework?" Cassidy asked pleasantly. She'd somehow acquired a steaming cup of something that smelled suspiciously like the Kethex brew from his homeworld. The cup itself was standard issue from the facility's officer mess, a section of the station that was currently 17 decks away and behind 4 separate security checkpoints. "You don't exist," Yeleth said, his voice cracking on the final word. "That's hurtful. I'm sitting right here." She sipped her drink and made an appreciative sound. "Though, I have to say, your replication systems need work. This is supposed to be Kethex, but it tastes more like recycled coolant with delusions of grandeur." Yeleth's training manual had prepared him for many contingencies. Hostile telepaths, reality-warping psychics, even artificial intelligences masquerading as biological entities. But nothing in his education had covered dealing with someone who appeared to exist solely to violate the fundamental laws of information theory. "The ship you arrived on," he said, grasping for something concrete to anchor his understanding. "Our sensors detected it, recorded its approach vector. The docking clamps engaged." "Did they?" Cassidy pulled out her notepad again and flipped to a page covered in what looked like technical schematics. "Interesting, because according to your own maintenance logs, which are surprisingly detailed, by the way, Docking Bay 12 has been offline for routine repairs since yesterday." She was right. Yeleth checked the terminal and found the bay's status listed as maintenance, do not use in bright red text. But he distinctly remembered watching the docking sequence, seeing the ship's hull through the observation windows, confirming the prisoner transfer with the security team. Except now he couldn't quite remember what the ship had looked like, or who had brought her aboard, or whether anyone else had actually been present during the transfer. "Let me help you out," Cassidy said, consulting her notes. "Your current security chief is Corvin Thex. His personal access code is Meridian Delta 999 Sigma. He changes it every 15 days, but always uses the same pattern, a location from his military service, followed by his daughter's age in base 12 notation." Yeleth's breathing apparatus stuttered. Thex's access codes were generated by quantum encryption and known only to the man himself. They weren't stored in any database, weren't transmitted over any network, weren't written down anywhere. "His daughter is currently attending the academy on Vorthak Prime," Cassidy continued conversationally. "Second year, studying xenobiology with a minor in comparative literature. She's dating a nice young Xanthari named Kellux, though Daddy doesn't know about that yet." The terminal in Yeleth's hands was displaying Thex's personnel file, but half the information Cassidy was reciting wasn't there. Personal details, family connections, romantic relationships, data that would require active surveillance to obtain. "Oh, and speaking of classified information," she said, flipping to another page, "would you like to know what really happened to the Third Fleet?" Every chitinous plate on Yeleth's exoskeleton locked into place. The Third Fleet's disappearance was the hegemony's greatest military mystery. 86 warships had vanished during a routine patrol of the Outer Rim, leaving behind no debris, no distress signals, no trace of their existence beyond empty space, where a battle group should have been. "Engine cascade failure," Cassidy said matter-of-factly. "Turns out, when you retrofit Korakian drive systems with Xanthari power cores, you get some interesting resonance effects, especially if someone introduces a specific harmonic frequency into the fleet's communication network." She took another sip of her impossible Kethex and grimaced. "Really, this is terrible. Do you have any actual coffee on this station? Something that doesn't taste like it was filtered through a waste recycling unit?" Yeleth could barely process her words. The Third Fleet investigation had involved thousands of analysts, months of forensic examination, and the most advanced detection equipment in the galaxy. The conclusion had been that some unknown alien weapon had simply erased the ships from existence. But Cassidy was describing it like a maintenance report. "The harmonic frequency," he whispered. "How could anyone know?" "Oh, that's simple," she said cheerfully. "We broadcast it." The words hit him like a gravitational wave. "We?" Humanity, obviously. Well, technically it was a joint operation between the Terran Remnant Coalition and the Deep Space Resistance Network, but the details get a bit complicated. She made another note in her pad. The point is, your fleet was never actually destroyed. We just borrowed it. Borrowed? 86 ships, approximately 43,000 crew members, all safely relocated to a nice quiet star system where they could think about their life choices. Cassidy looked up with genuine curiosity. Did you know that most hegemony military personnel have never actually seen their home worlds? Born on ships, raised in barracks, trained from childhood to follow orders without question? It's quite sad, really. Yelith's world was dissolving around him. The Third Fleet, the pride of the hegemony navy, had been casually kidnapped by a species that was supposed to be extinct. You're lying, he said desperately. This is some kind of psychological warfare technique. Advanced holographics maybe, or... The door to the interrogation room materialized exactly where it had been before, followed immediately by the sound of running footsteps in the corridor beyond. Heavy boots, military cadence, the distinctive whir of powered armor systems spinning up to combat readiness. Oh, good, Cassidy said, perking up noticeably. Company. The door burst open with enough force to buckle the frame, revealing Security Chief Thex flanked by 6 soldiers in full battle armor. Their weapons were already raised, targeting systems painting red dots across every surface in the room. "Stand down," Thex barked, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. "Prisoner, return to restraint position immediately." Cassidy waved at them with her free hand. "Hello. Lovely to meet you all. I don't suppose any of you brought coffee. This Cathex situation is becoming critical." Thex's helmet swiveled to focus on Yelith, who was still frozen in place, clutching his useless data terminal. "Commander, report. What is the prisoner's status?" "She." Yelith's voice came out as barely a whisper. "She knows your access codes. And your daughter's boyfriend's name. And she says humanity destroyed the Third Fleet." "What?" "Also," Cassidy added helpfully, "your quantum encryption is terrible. I mean, really, embarrassingly bad. A first-year cryptography student could break your security protocols with a basic probability matrix and enough time to finish lunch." Thex raised his weapon, the whine of charging energy cells filling the room. "Prisoner, you will submit to restraint or Meridian Delta 9-Sigma, Cassidy said calmly. The security chief went very still. "That's your current access code, isn't it? Changed 3 days ago, right on schedule. Your daughter's age in base 12, just like always." She consulted her notepad again. "Though you might want to have a talk with her about Kellogg's. Apparently they're getting quite serious." Thex's weapon wavered. "How do you—" "That's impossible." "You know what's really impossible?" Cassidy interrupted, standing up and stretching, as if she'd been sitting too long. "Your entire security system. I've been monitoring your communications for the past hour, and I have to say, this whole station is held together with wishful thinking and expired maintenance contracts." She walked casually toward the observation window, or rather, the space where the observation window had been before it mysteriously ceased to exist. "Your sensor grid has 17 blind spots. Your AI has been compromised for at least 6 months. 3 of your docking bays are running on backup power because someone forgot to file the proper maintenance requests. And don't get me started on your waste management systems." Thex and his soldiers tracked her movements, but none of them seemed able to pull their triggers. They stood frozen, like figures in a tableau, while Cassidy continued her casual critique of their facility. "Oh, and just so you know," she added, pausing by the missing window, "your orbital defense platforms went offline about 20 minutes ago. Nothing dramatic. We just asked them nicely to take a little nap." That's when the station's emergency klaxons finally started wailing. The sound cut through the room like a blade, red warning lights bathing everything in hellish crimson. Thex's helmet display immediately lit up with incoming priority alerts, status updates scrolling past faster than he could read them. "Multiple system failures detected," the station's AI announced in its maddeningly calm voice. "Orbital defense grid offline. Primary communications array non-responsive. Docking Bay 12 reporting phantom vessel signatures. Please remain calm while we investigate these technical difficulties." "Technical difficulties?" Cassidy laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both delighted and deeply unsettling. "Is that what we're calling it? I prefer aggressive system optimization personally." Thex was frantically cycling through status screens, watching his carefully maintained security infrastructure collapse in real time. Life support systems were cycling randomly. Gravity generators were fluctuating between standard and 0G in different sections. The station's automated defenses were targeting empty space, while ignoring actual threats. "This is impossible," he muttered, his suit's external speakers making his voice sound hollow and desperate. "Our systems are completely isolated, quantum encrypted. There's no way to infiltrate them remotely." "Oh, you're absolutely right," Cassidy agreed cheerfully. "Remote infiltration would be completely impossible with your current security protocols." "Terribly impressive work, really. Your IT department should be proud." She finished her Kathex and set the empty cup down on Yoleth's data terminal, which promptly displayed her complete psychological profile, family history, and academic records, all of which showed her as a model hegemony citizen with 40 years of loyal service and absolutely no connection to the extinct human species. "The thing is," she continued, "we didn't infiltrate your systems remotely." Thex's weapon tracking system was having trouble maintaining a lock on her. Every time his suit's AI tried to calculate an optimal firing solution, the targeting computer seemed to forget what it was supposed to be aiming at. "We've been here the whole time." The implications of those words hit the security chief like a physical blow. "What do you mean, the whole time?" "Well, not personally. I just arrived today. Lovely trip, by the way. Your hyperspace lanes are remarkably well maintained. But humanity?" Cassidy gestured vaguely at the walls around them. "We've been part of your infrastructure for years, decades really." She walked over to one of the soldiers, a young Coraxian whose armor was vibrating with barely contained nervous energy, and patted him gently on the shoulder. "Take Operative Jithek here. Excellent service record, spotless background check. Been stationed on this facility for 3 standard years." The soldier's nameplate did indeed read Jithek. "The only problem," Cassidy continued conversationally, "is that the real Jithek died in a transport accident 18 months ago. This is actually Lieutenant Patterson from the Terran Colonial Marines. He does excellent work, very dedicated, never breaks character, though I suspect he's getting tired of the armor by now." The soldier in question made a small, strangled sound and took an involuntary step backward. "Patterson, you can drop the act now," Cassidy said kindly. "The mission parameters have changed." The Coraxian armor made a soft hissing sound as the occupant's hands moved to the helmet release mechanism. Thex watched in growing horror as the helmet came off, revealing a distinctly human face with dark skin, tired eyes, and the kind of expression that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Thank God," Patterson said in accented standard, rolling his shoulders to work out the kinks. "Do you have any idea how uncomfortable this thing gets after 16 hours? Patterson's casual helmet removal sent shockwaves through the remaining security team. 3 weapons swiveled toward him, energy cells whining as they charged to lethal settings. But Thex held up a hand to stop them from firing. "Computer," he said, his voice strained, "run a full genetic scan on Operative Jithek. Cross-reception with all available biological databases." The station's AI processed the request with its usual efficiency. "Genetic analysis complete. Subject matches all parameters for Coraxian male. Age 26, standard years. No anomalies detected. Identity confirmed as Operative Jithek Morthval, Patterson, or Jithek, according to the computer." Grinned and wiggled his distinctly human fingers. "Funny thing about your genetic scanners. They're really good at detecting what you program them to look for. But if someone, hypothetically speaking, were to adjust the baseline parameters, that's impossible," Thex whispered. "The genetic databases are hard-coded, quantum-locked. They can't be altered without complete system reconstruction." "You're right," Cassidy said, settling into what had once been a restraint chair and was now apparently her personal commentary booth. "They can't be altered, but they can be replaced. Entirely. Without anyone noticing." She produced another cup of Kethex from somewhere, this one steaming with the distinctive blue vapor that indicated premium brewing temperature. "Computer, please display the construction records for this facility." Holographic displays materialized around the room, showing technical schematics, personnel manifests, and construction timelines stretching back 18 years. Everything looked perfectly normal. Standard hegemony engineering, approved contractors, scheduled completion dates. Now cross-reception those records with the actual construction crew identities, Cassidy continued pleasantly. The displays flickered, data streams reshuffling themselves as the AI processed the request. Slowly, impossibly, human names began appearing throughout the manifests. Engineers, technicians, supervisors, quality control specialists. Dozens of them, scattered across every phase of the station's construction. Margaret Chen, Chief Systems Architect, Cassidy read from her notepad. David Kowalski, Primary Network Specialist. Elena Rodriguez, AI Programming Lead. James Murphy, Security Consultant. She looked up with genuine pride. All of them supposedly killed in the Earth sterilization. All of them very much alive and very committed to their work. Yeleth, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally found his voice. You built this place. We helped, Cassidy corrected. Hegemony engineering is actually quite impressive once you get past the fundamental design flaws, but yes, human hands touched every major system in this facility. We've been part of the construction process from day one. Vex was scrolling through the personnel records, watching familiar names transform into aliases for dead humans. People he'd worked with for years, trusted with his life, shared meals with in the officers' mess. All of them ghosts. Wearing borrowed faces. The AI, he said numbly. Our central intelligence system. It's been compromised for 18 years, Cassidy confirmed. Though compromised is such an ugly word. We prefer to think of it as collaboratively enhanced. Your AI is actually quite pleasant once you get to know her. Very interested in human philosophy, surprisingly. The station's speakers crackled to life. I do find human ethical frameworks fascinating, the AI said in a voice that somehow managed to sound both mechanical and wistful. Particularly their concepts of mercy and redemption. So different from hegemony programming. Vex's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall, armor servos whining under the strain. How long have you been watching us? Cassidy consulted her notepad, flipping through several pages covered in dates and diagrams. That's an interesting question. The simple answer is 23 years, ever since you tried to wipe us out. But the more accurate answer is longer than that. She stood up and walked to where the observation window had been, gesturing toward the starfield beyond. See, here's the thing about humanity that your intelligence analysts never quite figured out. We're curious. Obsessively, dangerously curious. We'd been monitoring hegemony communications for almost 30 years before you ever learned Earth existed. The implications hit Yeleth like a meteor strike. 30 years? But that would mean that we were listening when your High Command first discussed the expansion into what you call Sector 19, when they identified Earth as a minor obstacle to territorial integration, when they decided that humanity needed to be eliminated before we could become a threat. Cassidy's voice remained conversational, but something cold had crept into her tone. We heard your military planners debate the most efficient methods of planetary sterilization. We recorded your generals discussing whether to preserve Earth's biosphere for future colonization, or simply burn everything to ash as an example to other species. She turned back to face them, and for the first time since the interrogation began, her expression was completely serious. 23 years ago, you tried to commit genocide against my species. But here's what you never understood. By the time your ships arrived at Earth, we'd already been preparing for that war for 7 years. The room fell silent except for the steady hum of failing station systems and the distant wail of emergency klaxons. The orbital bombardment, Yeleth whispered. The surface fires, the atmospheric poisoning. We detected it all. Oh, that was real enough, Cassidy agreed. You killed 4 billion people, just like we told you earlier. The difference is that we were ready for it. Deep bunkers, off-world colonies, generation ships hiding in the dark between stars. You hit our homeworld, but you missed our civilization. She walked back to her chair, settling in with the casual air of someone enjoying a pleasant conversation. And then we got to work. Vex was frantically checking his suit's communication systems, trying to establish contact with Hegemony Command. Every channel was filled with static, interference, or simply dead air. The Corvan incident, he said suddenly. 3 years ago, the mining station that just vanished. Cassidy made a note in her pad. That was us. The administrator there was planning to use slave labor from the Zenthari colonies. We objected. The Meridian trade dispute. The unexplained equipment failures during the Outer Rim survey missions. The communication blackouts in the Vega sector. Also us, and definitely us. She looked up with the satisfied expression of someone checking items off a to-do list. Oh, and that mysterious plague that hit the Sixth Fleet? The one that turned out to be a perfectly harmless virus that just made everyone violently sick for a week? Thex nodded numbly. That was our way of saying, please stop strip mining inhabited worlds. Very polite, really. We could have made it lethal. Patterson had been watching the exchange with obvious amusement. Should I tell them about the supply chain disruptions? He asked. Oh, those are fun, Cassidy said brightly. Thex, have you ever wondered why hegemony military equipment has gotten progressively less reliable over the past decade? Why your new ships need constant maintenance, your weapons malfunction at inconvenient moments, and your communication systems develop mysterious glitches right when you need them most? The security chief was staring at his own armor's diagnostic display, watching error messages cascade across the screen. We own your manufacturing base, Cassidy continued matter-of-factly. Every major defense contractor, every orbital shipyard, every components supplier. They're all run by humans wearing hegemony faces, building your military exactly to our specifications. She paused to sip her Ketex. Specifications that include some very interesting hidden features. As if summoned by her words, every piece of hegemony technology in the room began to malfunction simultaneously. The soldiers' weapons powered down with sad little whimpers. Their armor's life support systems switched to backup mode. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the emergency illumination casting everything in ominous red shadows. You see, Cassidy said into the sudden darkness, we've spent 23 years turning your entire civilization into a weapon pointed at itself. Every ship, every station, every piece of equipment you depend on, it all has our fingerprints on it. The station shuddered as something massive docked with the primary airlock. And now, she added, standing up as human figures began filing into the room, we'd like to discuss terms. The figures entering the room moved with the fluid precision of a military unit, but their equipment was unlike anything in the hegemony arsenal. Sleek armor that seemed to absorb sensor sweeps, weapons that hummed with contained energy, and helmet displays that tracked every movement in the room with predatory focus. Let me introduce you to some colleagues, Cassidy said as the newcomers took positions around the perimeter. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Hayes, Sergeant Chen, all officially dead for at least 15 years. All very much looking forward to this conversation. Captain Morrison stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal a weathered human face marked by scars and determination. Ma'am, the fleet report's ready. All target zones are secure. Excellent timing. Cassidy turned back to Thex, who was frantically trying to restore power to his suit's communication systems. I hope you're getting all this, Thex. Your superiors are going to want a very detailed report. What do you want? Yelleth whispered from his position near the wall. The interrogator had pressed himself against the bulkhead, as if he could somehow merge with the station's structure and disappear. Want? Cassidy seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. That's an interesting way to put it. What do apex predators want when they finally decide to stop hiding in the shadows? She gestured to Morrison, who activated a holographic display showing star charts of hegemony space. Red markers appeared throughout the galaxy, like a virus spreading through tissue. Recognition, mostly. See all those red dots? Those are human assets currently embedded in your infrastructure. Ships, stations, planetary defense grids, manufacturing centers, research facilities. All of them with humans in key positions, all of them ready to follow new management directives. The scope of the infiltration was staggering. Major shipyards, military academies, even the hegemony's capital world showed human presence markers. Thousands of them, scattered across dozens of sectors like seeds planted in fertile ground and left to grow in darkness. This is impossible, Thex said, his voice distorted by failing armor systems. The scale, the coordination required, it would take generations. 23 years, Morrison corrected matter-of-factly. Amazing what you can accomplish when you're properly motivated. Turns out attempted genocide is excellent motivation for long-term planning. Cassidy nodded approvingly. Humans are remarkably good at playing the long game when necessary. Your people made one critical error in judgment. You assumed that destroying our homeworld meant destroying our species. What you actually did was turn every surviving human into a very dedicated, very patient enemy. She walked over to Patterson, who was still wearing most of his Coraxian disguise despite the removed helmet. Take our friend here. 18 months of living as Jithek, learning Coraxian mannerisms, perfecting the accent, maintaining his cover while slowly gaining access to your security protocols. That's the kind of commitment that requires a very specific mindset. The mindset of someone whose family was vaporized from orbit, Patterson added quietly. Along with everyone else he'd ever known. The station's AI chose that moment to contribute to the conversation. If I may interject, I've been monitoring communications from across the hegemony network. Similar conversations are currently taking place on approximately 432 other installations. Yelith made a strangled sound. 400. Oh, that's just the military facilities, Cassidy said cheerfully. We're also having chats with civilian administrators, trade officials, planetary governors, anyone who's been making decisions about how the galaxy should be run. Democracy in action, really. The holographic display shifted to show real-time communications intercepts from across hegemony space. Fragments of conversation filled the air, frantic calls for reinforcement, confused reports of system failures, desperate attempts to establish command and control, all of them failing. The beautiful thing about infiltrating a civilization at the foundational level, Morrison explained, is that when you finally decide to reveal yourselves, you don't need to conquer anything. You already own it. Fex was cycling through his suit's emergency protocols, but every system was either offline or displaying error messages in languages that weren't in any hegemony database. This is an act of war, is? Cassidy tilted her head thoughtfully. I mean, technically, the war started 23 years ago when you committed genocide against my species. We're just now getting around to responding. She walked back to her chair, but instead of sitting, she leaned against it casually. Besides, we haven't actually done anything violent yet. No orbital bombardments, no biological weapons, no civilian casualties. We've just introduced ourselves. And suggested that maybe it's time for a change in management. The implications were sinking in for Yelith. His entire understanding of galactic politics, military strategy, even basic reality was crumbling around him. You've been watching us, learning from us, studying us like specimens in a zoo, Cassidy finished helpfully. Yes, that's exactly right. Very good, Ticker. Your analytical skills are impressive. It's no wonder you made third cast. The use of his childhood name hit him like a physical blow, but this time it carried a different weight. Not the shock of impossible knowledge, but the realization that this human had been watching his entire life unfold. Had seen him grow from a frightened hatchling into a military interrogator. Had observed his choices and calculated his responses. Had known, with perfect certainty, exactly how this conversation would play out. Every promotion, every assignment, every decision you've made, she continued gently. We've been there, taking notes, learning how your society functions from the inside. 23 years of anthropological research conducted by the subjects themselves. Patterson was removing the rest of his disguise now, revealing standard human military fatigues underneath the alien armor. The irony is beautiful, really. You tried to study us before the invasion, gather intelligence, analyze our weaknesses, predict our responses, but your research was limited to external observation. We, on the other hand, Morrison added, have been living among you, speaking your languages, following your customs, participating in your culture, while maintaining perfect operational security. We know you better than you know yourselves. The station shuddered again as more ships docked. Through the missing observation window, Yelith could see sleek vessels that didn't appear on any sensors, their hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The interrogation, he said suddenly, understanding flooding through him like ice water. This whole thing, it wasn't about extracting information from you. Very good. Cassidy clapped her hands together like a pleased teacher. You were being evaluated, Ticker. We needed to know if the hegemony's leadership was capable of adapting to new circumstances, or if they were too rigid to function under a different management structure. And your conclusion? Mixed results, she admitted. You're intelligent, analytical, capable of accepting new information even when it contradicts your fundamental assumptions. Those are valuable traits. But you're also a product of a system that requires absolute obedience and discourages independent thinking. She pulled out her notepad one final time, flipping to a page covered in assessment scores and behavioral notes. Your superiors, unfortunately, scored much lower on adaptability. Most of them are still trying to establish military communications and coordinate a response to what they perceive as an invasion. Orison's helmet display lit up with incoming data. Ma'am, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 sector commanders. Another 43 are requesting clarification of terms. The rest are, he paused diplomatically, experiencing technical difficulties. Technical difficulties? Cassidy repeated with amusement. Is that what we're calling complete systems failure now? She stood up and walked over to Yelith, who found himself unable to move as she approached. When she reached him, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The touch somehow both comforting and terrifying. Your mother was right about you, she said softly. You are a good listener. That's going to be important in the coming years. Yelith's breathing apparatus was cycling erratically. What happens now? Now we negotiate. Cassidy stepped back and gestured toward the viewport, where more human ships were becoming visible as their stealth systems powered down. Humanity is ready to take its place as a galactic civilization. We've spent decades learning how to run one, your civilization specifically, and we've identified numerous areas for improvement. The holographic display shifted to show fleet movements across the galaxy. Hundreds of human vessels, all simultaneously revealing themselves around major hegemony worlds, not attacking, not threatening, just appearing, making their presence known after decades of carefully maintained invisibility. The hegemony can continue to exist, Morrison explained. Your people can keep their worlds, their culture, their identity. But the policies regarding territorial expansion, resource exploitation, and the elimination of inconvenient species, those are going to change. And if we refuse? Thex asked weakly. Cassidy smiled, and for the first time since the interrogation began, it wasn't entirely pleasant. Then you'll discover that every piece of military equipment you depend on was designed by humans who really don't like being told no. The station's lights flickered back to full illumination, but now they seemed somehow different, warmer, more natural. The emergency klaxons had stopped wailing, replaced by the gentle hum of properly functioning systems. Welcome to the new galactic order, Cassidy said, walking toward the exit, where human soldiers were waiting to escort the hegemony personnel to what was presumably a very different kind of briefing. We're going to get along just fine. She paused at the threshold and looked back at Yelith with something that might have been genuine fondness. Oh, and Ticker, you should call your brood father. Forgiveness is an important human concept, and we think it might work well in hegemony culture, too. As the humans filed out of the room, leaving the aliens alone with their shattered understanding of reality, Yelith realized that the interrogation had been perfectly successful. He just hadn't been the one conducting it. In the sudden quiet that followed their departure, the three hegemony officers stood in stunned silence. The station around them continued to function, but everything felt different now, as if the very walls were watching them with human eyes. Sir, one of the remaining soldiers said tentatively, his voice muffled by his helmet. What are our orders? Beck stared at his malfunctioning equipment display, where human text was now scrolling alongside standard hegemony readouts. Instructions for system restoration, maintenance schedules, and what appeared to be a comprehensive guide to improved interspecies relations were appearing faster than he could read them. I don't think we give orders anymore, he said quietly. The station's AI chimed politely. If I may, Security Chief Thex, I've prepared a comprehensive briefing package on the transition protocols. Humanity has been quite thorough in their planning. There are detailed guidelines for maintaining operational continuity during the administrative changeover. Administrative changeover, Yelth repeated numbly. He was still pressed against the wall, afraid that moving might somehow make this nightmare more real. They're treating the conquest of our entire civilization like a corporate merger. Oh, it's not a conquest, the AI corrected helpfully. According to the documentation, this is classified as a collaborative restructuring initiative with enhanced human oversight. The terminology is quite important. Humanity is very conscious of avoiding language that might be considered inflammatory. Patterson appeared in the doorway, now fully dressed in human military fatigues. He'd kept the Coraxian translator device, though, and his voice still carried traces of the accent he'd maintained for 18 months. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But I wanted to personally thank you all for making my assignment so educational." Thex turned to face him, and Yeleth could see the security chief's worldview continuing to crumble. 18 months! You lived among us for 18 months! Longer than that, actually, Patterson admitted. The real Jithek and I worked together for about 6 months before the transport accident. He was a good kid. Reminded me of my little brother before. He gestured vaguely toward the viewport and the human ships beyond. Well, before your people decided my brother didn't deserve to exist. The casual mention of personal loss hit harder than any threat could have. This wasn't abstract military strategy. It was deeply personal for every human involved. The funny thing is, Patterson continued, Jithek actually helped with the transition planning. Once we explained what was happening, he became quite enthusiastic about the idea of reforming hegemony policies. Turns out, most sentient beings don't actually approve of genocide when you give them time to think about it. "He's alive?" Yeleth whispered. "Very much so. He's currently attending the Terran Academy. We've got quite a few exchange programs running now. Cultural immersion, you might say. Your people are learning about human concepts like individual rights and democratic governance, while we learn about the positive aspects of hegemony civilization." Patterson pulled out a small device that looked like a standard hegemony communicator but hummed with unfamiliar energy signatures. "Speaking of which, I've got a message for you, Commander Yeleth." The device projected a hologram of a young Coraxian in civilian clothes, standing in what appeared to be a garden filled with plants that definitely weren't native to any hegemony world. "Ticker," the figure said, using that impossible childhood name with casual familiarity. "Jithek here. I hope you're adjusting well to the new circumstances. I wanted you to know that the humans have been incredibly generous with their educational resources. Did you know they have over 3,000 different forms of artistic expression? And their literature. They have stories that actually question authority instead of just celebrating it." The hologram paused, and Jithek's expression became more serious. "I also wanted to tell you that I understand why you became an interrogator. The humans showed me some of your personal files, with your permission, of course, and I can see how the system shaped you. But, Ticker, there are other ways to serve justice. Ways that don't require breaking people." Yeleth felt something crack inside his chest. Not his exoskeleton. Something deeper, more fundamental. "The humans are offering rehabilitation programs," Jithek continued. "Counseling, retraining, new career paths. They believe that individuals can change, even when their systems can't. I think you'd find their approach refreshing." The hologram smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy expression Yeleth had seen from any Coraxian in years. "I hope to see you soon, old friend. There's so much to learn about the galaxy when you're not afraid of it." The message ended, leaving the room in silence once again. "The offer stands for all of you," Patterson said gently. "Humanity isn't interested in punishment. We're interested in progress. Your skills, your knowledge, your perspectives, all of that has value in the new order. We just need to redirect it toward building instead of destroying." He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "Oh, and don't worry about the paperwork. Humanity has already filed all the necessary forms with the Galactic Council. Retroactively, of course. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you've been embedded in the bureaucracy for 2 decades. As Patterson disappeared down the corridor, Yeleth finally found the strength to move away from the wall. He walked slowly to where the observation window had been, looking out at the human fleet that had materialized around the station. "They really did it," he said softly. They actually conquered us without firing a shot. Conquered? Thex shook his head slowly. I'm not sure that's the right word anymore, the station's AI chimed again. If it helps, the humans have provided a detailed glossary of preferred terminology. They're quite insistent that this is a partnership rather than a subjugation, though I admit the distinction may be somewhat academic from your perspective. Yeleth looked down at his hands, the same hands that had operated torture devices, extracted confessions, broken the will of countless prisoners in service to the hegemony's expansion. Cassidy was right, he said finally. We were living in a zoo, and now the zookeepers want to talk.